So actually, Mr. Yeager I believe he just sent an email. Hold on. He needs to resend it. All right, let me resend him the link. Okay, you guys go ahead and start with the link. You want to let Mr. Vos know we're live? Okay, we are live, Mr. Vos, if you want to begin.
Great, yeah. Thank you. So it's Wednesday, May 5th, 2021, about 5:08 p.m., the regular meeting of the major LC Citizens Oversight Committee will come to order. This meeting is being conducted telephonically and virtually pursuant to Governor's Order N29-20. Because this is a telephonic meeting, all votes will be taken by roll call. So may we have the roll call, please? Ms. Dosh.
Committee member Yeager. Gomez.
Present.
Harvey.
Present.
Vice Chair Sison. Chair Vos.
Thank you. Yes, I'm here. So we have a quorum, right? So it would be appropriate to consider a motion to excuse Mr. Yeager and Vice Chair Sison from the meeting today.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All right, any objections? So ordered. So let me offer a brief invocation tonight. We seek God's blessings on our tasks before us this evening. Bless our efforts with clear insight, our deliberations with wisdom, our work with clarity and accuracy, and our decisions with impartiality. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
So tonight we have Mr. Harris, Mr. Nibla will be making presentations, and Mr. DiRico, I'm assuming. So
yes. So before you tonight, Commission, we have a presentation that outlines a list of programs that we believe as staff are all possible to be implemented with the addition of Measure LC. As we are continuing through the budget process, the actual allocation of funds to these various programs are still yet to be determined, as the council will have to make that ultimate decision. But we thought it wise tonight to go through those programs with you, get you a clear understanding of what's involved, what's currently happening for the programs that currently exist that are being expanded with Measure LC funds, and those programs that will be initiated with Measure LC funds. Joining us tonight is the Public Safety Director, Lee DiRico, and he has a specific portion of the presentation tonight that is going to be, in my mind, somewhat revolutionary in terms of police staffing and public safety operations. That program is one that has begun conceptually a few years ago, and now with Measure LC funding, we'll be able to implement that program. And so I'll allow him to go on through that presentation, but that is why he's joining us tonight. The rest of the programs have some degree of funding already with them in the existing budget prior to Measure LC, but they'll be able to be expanded with the addition. a Measure LC. And so Trolise, the Assistant City Manager, Trolise Niebla, will be able to go into some detail on that. And then there are a few ideas that we are discussing now from an economic development standpoint and from an entrepreneurial standpoint that we'd like to introduce to the group tonight as well. But with that, why don't we just, actually, if you don't mind, I will pause because it appears Mr. Yeager has joined us, and you may want to acknowledge his presence in the minutes before we start the presentation.
Welcome, Mr. Yeager. Are you there?
I'm unmuted. Sorry about that. I had some difficulty getting hooked up to the Zoom, but Mr. Harris sent me resent me the link, and I got in here all right. So apologize, but I'm here and ready.
No worries. Thank you. Glad you could make it.
Yeah.
So for the record, Mr. Yeager joined the meeting at 5:13. Okay, so with that, we'll continue with the presentation. Trelise, if you want to go ahead and launch.
Can you see it?
Yep. Can everyone see that? All right, so the first couple of slides are intended to recap what we discussed at the last meeting, just really talking about the schedule that we have for the budget process. So here we are at the beginning of May. It was originally planned to have this meeting last week. So there in the previous schedule, you see the Measure LC Commission meeting taking place at the end of April. Now it's taking place the first week of May, so we're about a week behind. But the final workshop prep will take place, and the final plans will take place during the month of May and be presented to the city manager with his approval before we move forward with council briefings and final council adoption to take place in the month of June. Next slide. As a recap of our previous conversation, just kind of reminding the board of how do we actually arrive at the numbers. Primarily tonight, we're going to talk about the personnel cost, the contract cost, and then the revenue. We have been able to actually finalize what the actual estimate is. In working with our consultant, HDL, they were actually able to narrow down that estimate to an actual number. Before you were presented with a range, now we have the actual estimate that they have. Still to be determined until we actually see money in the bank. When we actually start receiving the actual revenue, only then will we tell exactly how much we're going to be able to generate. But the actual, on the revenue side, the consultant input is what we're going to be using for this particular revenue for Measure LC. Next slide, please. So once again, we're here talking about, you are all appointed to be the oversight board for the Measure LC local sales tax, or commonly known as a local district tax, or also commonly known as a use tax. All three you may hear as describing Measure LC, but for our purposes, we're going to continue, and for the presentation, we'll continue to call it Measure LC. The original measure was intended to protect, in general, the high quality of life in Lancaster with the strict financial accountability, which is why you're all here. There was a large list of items that were listed in the original campaign, things that would be made possible as a result of Measure LC being approved. Some of those things, or quite frankly, many of those things you'll hear some descriptions of tonight. But the idea is, because it is actually, next slide. And then flip after this one, Charlie, flip back to them. So no, you're good here. You're good on this one. All right. Just as a reminder, it's for local sales tax elections. If we were to identify specific uses for the tax, it would require a 2/3 vote. So as we have to be careful and just cautious of the fact that as we identify any specific uses, that may contradict how the tax was originally elected in the form or the way it was actually approved. So we're very cautious in our description of things to say these are programs that we can expand, and that the funding, where they come from, are going to come from general revenue, that general fund revenues that come in, one of which is Measure LC. And so, yes, and so what we're going to talk about in more specific terms are the items that we can fund now as a result of having Measure LC without specifically saying that Measure LC was elected to specifically fund a particular program, because that would start to contradict the method at which the tax was approved. So I just want to let you know kind of more of the language and the terminology that we'll use in term to stay consistent with the guidelines that were set when the tax was passed. So you're going to hear quite a bit tonight me err on the side of caution by saying this is now a program we can do as a result of Measure LC being approved, as opposed to saying Measure LC will specifically fund these items, and this is the reason why. So I want to make sure that we're clear on that.
So George,
Mm-hmm.
and based on the way the measure was passed and the responsibility of the committee, then are we still in the analysis and ultimate recommendation mode to the city council, or are we just an active observer?
Well, with that, the idea is that as we discuss these programs, we're going to be talking about the expansion of particular programs. We're going to be talking about the expansion of things, some of which a lot of these programs are already taking place, but we're talking about funding the expansion of them. Your input and your advice in regards to any one of these programs is pretty vital as we proceed to moving the budget onto the city council. So if by any chance any of these projects you just don't think need to be expanded upon as a result of Measure LC, I'm pretty sure that advice would be heard by the council, as well as go into, and that's another reason Jason's on, not just to watch me and make sure I do my job. Jason, as he is evaluating the actual budget that's going to be presented to him shortly, it's very good. It's important that he understand what your perspective was on this pretty lengthy list of projects and initiatives and programs that we have. If by chance you could care less and don't think that the parks need any more help, and I'm being facetious. Everybody believes our parks need some help. If you believe that as a commission and just think that more of an emphasis should be on other programs, that's something that both Jason and the council would need to know. So that's the advisory capacity that you're in, is to really try to support that.
All right. So the mechanics of it, however, if we're only meeting quarterly and you're going to give us a presentation tonight to bring us through some relative analysis and likely recommendations on here's the basket of need that the general fund can be allocated to supplement or increase or whatever methodology you want to talk about. How do we take a definitive action if it's not agendized?
And so the idea of the presentation tonight is to receive input. And so the actual action item, there is no action item tonight because there's not a particular set of specific dollar figures assigned to any of these programs yet, because we're still going through that process. Now, after the budget is completed, it is intended that we will have another meeting with you all to actually show how the budget actually was assigned to each one of these programs and refresh it after the council's approval. And then at mid-year, we'll have a evaluation of how those items performed. And then once again, you'll have an opportunity in the third meeting to provide, some direction as to whether or not programs are performing or not, and some need to be shifted away or not.
Can I stop you right there? Your first comment, if I understood you correctly, you indicated that after the budget was adopted, we'd have another meeting. After the budget is adopted by the city council, we'd have another meeting. So really what you're saying is there's no definitive action on the part of, as you're proposing, on the part of this committee to take a stand, a recommendation, an action item on anything. That be correct?
As there is no specific request yet. So to me, a specific request would be program X dollars into X program and advance that to the council as our recommendation. At this time, as these programs have yet to be fully developed and the budget to be fully compiled yet, it's difficult for us to have specific numbers assigned. Yes.
George, I got it. You outlined it 3 different ways and saying the same thing. I got it.
Okay.
However, the timeline you just pointed out relates to, this is May, you're forecasting your June analysis and recommendation internally, and then city council briefing and adoption. Isn't that correct?
Can you repeat the last part? You kind of
a briefings, I should say. So that typically takes place in a council agenda, and then 2 weeks later, the next city council meeting, they adopt the budget, right?
That's correct. But it's your commentary tonight. It's your commentary tonight on the minutes that will be included in that in their consideration and in their deliberations.
All right. The commentary is one thing, but consensus is another, and I can't have consensus without a vote, and I can't have a vote without an agenda action item. You follow what I'm saying?
No, I absolutely follow, but it's just without having the opportunity to give you the overview of what these programs are, which is what this meeting's intended.
I get that, but
yeah,
I'm looking ahead here. You forecasted meetings quarterly. That's 2 to 3 months from now.
Right, and so
after the budget is adopted. So our input as a committee then is conversation without consensus or action item. Is that really what's going on?
Let me jump in. That's what's going on today. The question would be does the committee want a more specific action to take with budget numbers and other things like that? We can do that if that's necessary, or if the committee wishes. Well, I don't know. We have flexibility on that. We have flexibility on the timing of the meetings. If you want to have another meeting before that moment before the budget.
Right, and that meeting would take place probably the last meeting. We'd have a special meeting, the last meeting in May or the first meeting in June. I'm sorry, the first week in June.
I'm not sure what the response to that is, other than to refer back to the reason we were constituted in the first place and our specific role under that ballot measure, and that's our only guide.
Right. And in general, the description is to provide oversight and we want to make sure we adhere to that, but to provide oversight and in an advisory capacity. And so if the body is saying that in an advisory capacity, they'd like to actually have a formal resolution which is derived from consensus that you've all agreed on with the specific vote, then that is one direction. The other way to do that is to record your commentary as it relates to all of the items and relate all of those minutes to the council for consideration as these ideas are presented. Now, if you feel you want to arrive at a consensus on that commentary and that advice to the council, then that's up to the board. At this stage, we're actually prepared to receive commentary and insight from all of the board members and report it all to the council.
Appreciate that. So the specific ballot measure defines precisely what our obligations are.
Correct.
And I don't have that in front of me. Do any of you?
Let me grab the bylaws. Diane, do you have the exact bylaws?
I don't want to belabor it, but I don't want to put ourselves as a group in a position that we're not acting pursuant to the ballot measure, or failing to act for that matter. I'm certainly
we'll work through that. we can continue with the presentation, and the end result is if we feel that an actual action item is needed, then we will work on a board agenda night and date that will work with all of you.
So George, you're telling me it's staff generated, that the oversight group has no direct input then? That's really what you just said.
Well, it's direct input in an advisory sense. And so with that, as we record your input, we provide all that commentary to the council for consideration. So that could take place by recording minutes of any meeting, correct? Now, what you're suggesting is that actual consensus and a vote would take place to determine which advice advances on to the city council, meaning that if there were any disagreements, then the majority vote would rule and only that advice would advance to the council for consideration. My suggestion and my interpretation of what the advisory side of it is that you were all individually selected to provide input, and through going through the presentation and receiving your input and your commentary, that we would record and document all commentary and advance all commentary for consideration for of the council.
So everything we just discussed will be shared with the council. Is that you and I just discussed will be shared with the council?
Okay. Well, we'll record that, or we'll check with the attorney too to see if the latter is what's necessary, in that an actual affirmative vote by way of either consensus or lack of consensus or majority rule is required to advance whatever instruction oversight to the board and to the council. We'll research that.
What I'm trying to be very clear about is the compliance with the Ralph M. Brown Act as it relates to creating consensus. And when you create consensus, you're in effect voting, and you can't vote on an item unless it's on the agenda. That's my point.
Mm-hmm.
And you're accurate in that.
That's true.
Our intent was not to have a vote of consensus by all 5 board members tonight and say all 5 board members, or 3 may agree or 2 may agree, whatever it may be. We can do that if that's the committee's wish. The intent.
The only reason I'm bringing it up is for the discussion prior to going in, because I've had no communication from anyone on the expectation of what's going on tonight. Mm-hmm. So you've got me at a disadvantage, and I'm sharing my concerns openly with everyone who is here, since I don't communicate directly with the other members of the committee, because it's inappropriate under the Brown Act. So that's why I'm having this conversation. I'm certainly looking forward to hearing the ideas that are being proposed, whatever they may be. However, it's the mechanics of how we operate that I'm responsible for as the chair. Mm-hmm. I'm not taking issue or criticizing.
No.
At all.
It's noted. It's noted. The concern is noted, and I'll make sure that before we meet again, you and I I'll get the answers to that and find out in which capacity the communication is to relay, whether through consensus and an affirmative vote or through the recordation of the actual commentary of all members in an advisory or a workshop atmosphere, as opposed to an actual needing the affirmative vote. So that's noted, and I will make sure that I research that and get back to you.
Thank you.
Okay. So with that, let's, Trelise, if you wouldn't mind going back one slide. So that one, forward where it lists the dollar amounts. Back one. You went to it. Go forward. Forward.
Let me know which one, George. Is it this down?
No. Go forward. One more. There we go. Right there. Go back.
I think it's if there's a delay or something.
Oh, that one.
Keep telling me to go and.
Sorry. Okay. This is the one. This is the one we want. All right. So thanks, Trelise. So in the previous presentation, we identified that the expectation for Measure LC in this fiscal year, in this budget fiscal year that we're discussing, was going to range from 12.8 million up to 16 million through additional pressing of HDL. And it's hard from HDL because HDL is trying to apply our tax to past activity and then forecast it into the future for a year to try to come up with a finite number that we can use for budgeting purposes. And so they had given us an early estimate of 12.8. Then we had heard from some folks at Palmdale that they heard our number was upwards to 13 or 16 million. I got back with HDL and said, I need you to give me a definitive result of what our number is going to be. And they came back with $13.7 million for the first full year.
Just to clarify, HDL is our sales tax consultant who does our sales tax analysis for us.
Thanks for the clarification. Thanks, Jason. All right, moving forward. All right, and so we talked about this pyramid the last time we met. This is the presentation today is somewhat organized around the layers of the pyramid. And so as we talked from the beginning, the higher level of importance is the bottom of the pyramid that builds the foundation, and then each next successive layer is no less important, but cannot be done unless we do the bottom layers effectively. And so starting with sound fiscal foundation and resilience. Next slide. Next slide. We talked in the last meeting about the reserves, the policy that will be presented along with the budget this year, and why we believed the specific layers that we're proposing be established with the reserves and the importance of them. We spent quite a bit of time in our last meeting to discuss it. I don't want to call it a dead horse because the council has yet to approve it, but it is one that we've spent quite a bit of time on last meeting. But I do want to reiterate that our ability now to take reserves from the end of this year to establish those reserves and those amounts next year are not going to require any Measure LC funding to be able to do that. So we have enough money in the bank in this year to be able to establish those reserves at the levels that are being proposed. And it wasn't designed that way. It just happened to be enough money when we actually calculated out what was required for each one of those layers. As a point of reiteration, the general fund reserves will consist of about 30% of the operating cost, total general fund operating cost, with 10% represented in working capital, emergency operating reserves at 15%, and then operating opportunity and emergency response reserves at an additional 5%, totaling the 30%. On the internal service side, the general fund will contribute to a general liability reserve as required as part of our self-insurance. Those numbers are actuarially decided. Our fleet maintenance, which was determined to be 20% of operating reserves. Currently, those reserves sit in the general fund, but because we're going to break out the fleet maintenance operation and internal information technology operation funds into their own individual funds, establishing reserves out of the general fund is important to do so at this year end. And then the Lancaster Choice Energy reserve set at 25%. We have actually, through operations of LCE, have been able to chip away to some significance the amount of the reserve requirement there. And so the contribution from the general fund may not need to be as high. Next slide. As we shift to protecting infrastructure, I'm going to turn it over to Trolise because that is his world as as a former city engineer and assistant city manager. A lot of these projects fall within his wheelhouse, so he is the best person to discuss those. So Trolise.
Yeah, I can't get away from the engineering side of me. It keeps calling me no matter where I try to go. But I love it. I'm glad I get to talk about this section, protecting infrastructure in this layer of the pyramid, or this level of the pyramid. As you all are aware, this is very near and dear to my heart. And a lot of these infrastructure type programs, it's nice to see that some of the backlogs that we've been incurring through the years on the maintenance of our infrastructure are going to be no longer backlogs and addressed through the additional funding we're getting through Measure LC. real quick before I jump into protecting infrastructure, just reiterating the importance of that pyramid that George showed earlier, and just that really establishes the way that we prioritize projects. So as you go up the pyramid and there's less importance, there's going to be less money, less projects in those areas, and more money and more projects really spent down below, really building those lower level foundational needs. Once those are met, then we can go up and reach into the other zones. So with that, let's jump into this protecting infrastructure. The first kind of overarching theme or program that we have is really this renovation and maintenance programs. And there's a lot of programs that fall into this, and I'll run through those. But again, this Measure LC money really help us catch a lot of these programs up and get our maintenance backlogs back into a reasonable, timeline. So the first program we'll talk about is our ADA and Sidewalk Program. These include things like our handicap ramps, any lips that you see on sidewalks where they lip and it creates a trip hazard, all of those types of things, root damage. This is both within our public right-of-way and at our facilities. So right now, we do have a pretty extensive backlog of damaged sidewalks and needed ADA improvements. These are typically identified through an inspection program that we put together, where our public works staff go out, inspect sidewalks annually. They put damaged locations on a list. We also have our ADA, or Americans Disability Act, transition plan, which has identified locations where we need to do improvements on some of our infrastructure to get it up to current standards. And then we get claims on, if we do have a trip hazard, we get a claim on it. So those locations get put on the list. So having a robust program and having this Measure LC funding help that robust program will help us catch up on our ADA transition plan and reduce the number of claims we're getting and ensure all of our facilities and sidewalks are maintained in good order. The next one we'll hit on is our pavement management program. So our pavement management program, we've been really hitting that hard since about 2015. We've been making this a lot of effort. You've probably seen paving all over the city, especially in the summer months when it's the nice time of year to pave. But this program, the last 2 years, we did a $50 million bond to accelerate these improvements and try to really catch up on some of that backlog maintenance. We are going into the third year of that. Next year will be the first year where we're finished the bond, but then we need to continue advancing the ball, keep paving streets, both neighborhoods, arterials, and providing safe, well-maintained pavement for our community. You've seen this recently on 10th Street, Avenue J, K, Avenue L. Avenue J is actually under construction right now with some median improvements. So Measure LC will continue to allow this program to flourish in the future. The next overarching program that we have is our parks maintenance program, which George touched on earlier. So the parks, they're really a cornerstone of our community. We have, over the past several years, we've already began to do some of this refurbishment that's needed to our parks. So you see the picture here. This is actually Owen Memorial Park. About 4 months ago, we opened this new playground up to residents. It's been well received. And Measure LC will allow us to continue to do these programs at other parks. Specifically, we have turf needs and turf maintenance needs. We have older buildings, bathrooms, ADA issues at our park sites. LPAC is in need of some upgrades. We want to change out all the lights at our parks to LED that can be controlled remotely, which will save us energy, both because it's an LED, but also because we can turn those on and off just from an app on your phone. So we want to do those types of upgrades. Updating our sports courts. We've done a few already, but there's a lot of other sports courts, whether it be our tennis courts, basketball courts, that need upgrading. So Measure LC allows us to advance this program. Next program is our Landscape Maintenance District Refurbishment Program. We've already kicked this off. We've got about $3 million that we're currently budgeted and programming and designing improvements for right now. This was this location here shown is at 40th and L. We recently, probably a year and a half ago, redid this as a test facility to see what the desert scape would look like, and it came out very well. So we're spending that first $3 million this next year to do some more enhancements on a couple other areas. Specifically, I think Sierra Highway and the bike trail, that bike path gets all redone with these, and then there's a number of other locations out the city. But Measure LC will allow us to continue to advance this program and continue to refurbish a lot of our medians or a lot of our landscape maintenance areas that are really in need, and remove those old plant pallets that weren't very drought tolerant, that used a lot of water, and replace it with, more modern, drought tolerant, water conscientious planting.
Trelise,
Yep.
Might I ask a quick question? So on those LMDs, are we focused more on from a sustainability perspective? Because what I do when I drive around town, I do see some of them where they've broken up based on, you covered it initially when you talked about the sidewalks and some of the other areas where it's breaking up, doing like root damage or that sort of thing. Is that one of the reasons we're going with more of a xeriscape inside of it, so that we don't have so much concrete jungle?
Yes, so that it does a lot of things. The planting pallet we're going to go for is an easier to maintain pallet, so it's more cost effective. Okay. B, it's a more drought tolerant, more sustainable planting pallet that's not going to use as much water, so that when we do go through these droughts like we're experiencing this year, it's we're being a lot more conscientious, saving water. That also saves money. And then, yes, we're looking at plants that don't damage the sidewalks and the pavement, because the last thing we want to do is have a tree that gets too large in there and then it breaks everything up. And then not only do we need to redo the either the median or the shoulder, we've got to do the curb, gutter, sidewalk, pavement, all of that. And it could create a trip hazard, which then we're dealing with a claim on. So we want to eliminate those problems when we can.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
The next program is a fleet maintenance program. So having a industry standard replacement plan on our fleet is absolute priority. The current average age of our fleet is about 11 years. The industry standard now is having a replacement plan that's about 10 years, 100,000 miles, which would put your average fleet age at somewhere between 5 and 6 years old. So our fleet is a little bit older than we would like. So having an appropriate fleet maintenance program would cut down on maintenance costs, fuel cost. So it would actually save us money to have a younger, more well-maintained fleet. Plus, we would also lose a lot less downtime for our staff. So a lot of times, like this truck here, we only have one lightning loader. This is what we use to clean up a lot of the illegal dumping with. And if this truck goes down, we can't clean up illegal dumping for a day, 2, 3, 4 days until that truck gets fixed. So if we've got a younger, more well-maintained fleet, we're saving money on maintenance, fuel cost, and we're not losing that downtime where we could have crews out there doing what they need to be doing, which is maintaining our infrastructure. So the next program is our annual long line striping program. This program we started about 2 years ago. We put about $400,000 a year to convert our striping over to thermoplastic, which has about a 5 to 7 year lifespan. So the program is designed to refurbish a fifth of the city every year to the thermoplastic striping, which holds up better, is a lot safer for drivers because it's higher visibility. So the Measure LC, again, it allows this program to flourish and continue on into the future so that we have safe markings, safe striping down on our roads that makes it safer for our drivers. The next program is this is actually a newer program that we're thinking of. It's a new idea that came out of kind of some brainstorming centered around Measure LC, but it's this neighborhood improvement program. We probably have hundreds and thousands, if not thousands, of code enforcement cases a year where we go out and we're dealing with property owners that aren't maintaining their property. In a lot of those cases, these are people that just don't have the financial wherewithal or financial means to do the maintenance. So we go through this constant enforcement and fining program with them where they can't afford to do the improvements and they can't afford to actually pay the fines. They never clean the property up, and it's just this constant circle with them. So rather than do that, we'd rather set up this grant program so when we do go out to these properties, rather than fine them, we say, hey, it looks like your finances may set you up to get this grant. We give them a grant, they go in, they do some maintenance on the property, put in xeriscape, something that's easy for them to maintain. It beautifies the neighborhood, and then so it resolves that issue, and we're not dealing with it as a code enforcement case. So it's really a win-win. It's a win for the neighborhood and the community, and it's a win for us and our enforcement side of things too. So this is a new program that Measure LC will allow us to venture and take on. Next one is our community cleanup program. I think this one was probably one that will touch a nerve with you, Chairman Vose, because I know that you've often called in and called us on several cleanup sites and cleanup areas. But as you guys are probably aware, in the Antelope Valley and specifically in Lancaster, illegal dumping is a big problem. Anywhere in the desert, if you drive out in there, you'll likely see somewhere where somebody dumped trash, debris, etc. So in November of 2020, just this past year, we actually created what we're calling the TIDE team, which is a team of illegal dumping eliminators. We permanently assigned 2 staff to go around and clean these up. We also entered into about a $500,000 contract with a contractor to help them out with these cleanups. At that time, we had about 600 requests for cleanup in from residents. We've since spent about 2,400 hours since then and cleaned up over 1,000 tons of trash. We've gotten that resident request backlog down to about 10 right now, and we handle those in about 10 days. Now, that doesn't mean we're cleaning all of the illegal dumping up. There's a proliferation out there, but we are able to keep up with our hotspot areas and a lot of the requests we're getting. So Measure LC will allow us to continue this program into the future and potentially expand it if we need to help try to keep up with the illegal dumping issue that we have. The next program is our Safer Streets Action Plan. So as you guys are probably aware, we have over the years approved several master plans. Our master plan of complete streets, our master plan of safe routes to school, our master plan of our Safer Streets Action Plan. Most recently, I think that was approved in January of 2020. And these identified locations in the city that need enhancements, improvements, engineering to mitigate certain collisions and crashes that were happening in the area. So Measure LLC will ensure that we have the funding needed to take care of those areas and ensure that we have safer streets moving on into the future. The next one is our Green Infrastructure Advancement Program. So as I'm sure you're aware, many years ago, probably 10 years ago, we embarked down a path to be a green net zero energy city. A few years back, through the creation of our CalChoice Energy and development of solar, we now produce through solar as much power as we consume in Lancaster. We've also partnered with our Antelope Valley Transportation Authority to become the first all-electric fleet in the nation. Those were very bold and unique goals, aspirational goals. And in that same spirit, we want to continue that on. We got things like expanding our recycled water line, and we just entered into our hydrogen challenge, and we announced that we are the first hydrogen city in the U.S. and we have embarked upon a 4-phase hydrogen plan, which will first start with some pilot projects and then move us until in 9 to 10 years, we're going to be producing hydrogen in this city, have an abundance of hydrogen stations and hydrogen cars on the road, have buildings that are being powered through hydrogen and hydrogen fuel cells, be able to deliver that hydrogen to those buildings via the Southern California gas network, full utility scale hydrogen. So these are very aspirational goals, and I'm sure there'll be more future green ideas that come our way, and Measure LC makes these possible. The next program, I'll turn over to George. He's going to take the next 2 slides under infrastructure.
All right. So as we are moving along with what has been commonly referred to as the sci-fi project, which is where we're partnering with a private operation who's going to come. They're going to come into town and lay high-speed fiber optic cabling through the entire city at their cost, utilizing a business model whereby they lease that capacity out to a variety of different internet service providers to be able to sell the service to our community. We have, from that project, we're going to be able to tap into that high-speed internet capacity and create what a lot of communities consider to be a smart city. And so we'll be able to expand Wi-Fi capabilities at various portions of the city. We'll be able to leverage the capacity of the Wi-Fi to distribute our own information, as well as possibly looking into other solutions as far as the business aspect of the internet service provider industry. And so with that, we'll be able to leverage that technology for our traffic control, for maintaining better protection from a public safety standpoint, and by being able to add digital camera capacity throughout the community, license plate readers, and all those things that can help from a public safety standpoint will be much easier to do once that project is completed and that capacity is created in the ground throughout the city. So that's really the point of the smart cities. Having the extra capital being produced by Measure LC will enable us to place some of those projects on the list on an ongoing basis, and hopefully be able to fund them in a short amount of time to be able to maximize the capabilities that are going to be provided with the expansion of that project through the community. This is also an idea that has actually launched in Palmdale as well. So they are also working with Sci-Fi to lay fiber optic cabling in their community. And so it's going to create an opportunity for us to actually leverage the fact that we both have that technology. And so along our borders with Palmdale, we will be able to not lose connection, as well as if there's any joint projects that we can work on with Palmdale, we know that they'll have the capacity, the infrastructure capacity to be able to do that and partner with us, which is really, really good. This is a lot of newer communities are built with fiber optic cabling in a city like ours, where we have some new and some old, and a lot of times there's no motivation for those companies to go into some of those older neighborhoods and lay the fiber optic cabling. And so we found a company that's going to just blanket the technology over the whole community and do so in an effort to reduce that what we call that digital divide that exists now in certain communities versus others. So it's a great project. The council's already taken action to have that project move forward. Having Measure LC provides us some capital that once that project's done, we can actually be able to build upon that project by creating some smart city solutions that could be added at that time. Next slide. Then information technology. So this has been added as a basis in that bottom tier of the triangle, only because for all of us to actually do our jobs and manage all of these multiple projects that are taking place, we need the best business systems and operation systems that we can to be able to create the efficiencies that we need to keep these projects going. We currently have an application deficiency in our financial software, as well as arguably in some other operation and management systems that we have throughout the organization. And so with the approval of Measure LC, we'll actually finally have some capital to truly address those deficiencies and make sure that we are staying up with the technology that's needed. And additionally, a lot of the older systems are more susceptible to risk and threat of cyber threats, cyber attacks. And so by being able to migrate to the more progressive models that have better technology and security built into them, it'll better protect our technological infrastructure as well as the infrastructure that was discussed by Trelease. Next slide. And so at this point, we'll turn it over to Lee.
Yeah, just real quick before we bounce over to Lee.
Okay.
In making these determinations too, we balance, there's kind of two things we balance, is ongoing operational expenses as well as one-time capital expense. So everything that we just covered before is the one-time. So at any point, if there's a downturn in sales tax or something happens, we can easily remove those programs, pull them out and replace them, or pull them out and eliminate them. At the same token, if they're completed, those free up funds for the next year to do another project. So these are kind of the one-time expenses that we kind of balance. The next one, Lee's going to be talking about more of an operational changes, which is an operational expense, which is an ongoing expense that includes hiring staff, doing it, increasing the fleet, a number of different things. So we really tried in this presentation to really balance those two aspects of it. We don't want to look at these funds as continuing, ongoing, so that we're going to spend $13 million a year on new programs, and then next year we're still spending $13 million. So we really kind of balance that so that these are you can move these funds into different programs and priorities as those programs and priorities change. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lita. I'm sure George is going to do the segue into Lee's program.
So as we started the conversation tonight, we just want to remind you that the hybrid policing model has been a subject of discussion by the council for more than a couple of years now. In concept, it has changed a bit in reaction to a lot of things that's been happening, but more importantly, now we have the funding provided by Measure LC to at least address it in phases or address it in whole. That's going to ultimately be up to the city council. But in general, I think Lee's going to discuss the program, what it is, what it means for us, and the general structure and why. And so at this point, without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Lee and let him be the best presenter for this subject as it's his baby.
Hi, thank you very much. I think the thing is as we've been talking about implementation of this program for some time in the development, if you really look at the development of it with the approval of the council and City Manager Caudle and the city administration, is we've been developing this now for several years. So even beyond formalizing it and calling it a hybrid model, we put certain structure in place, and that was related to things that have been occurring through the criminal justice system for some time now that all of you are very well aware of, going all the way back to non-revocable parole, to AB 109, which released low-level offenders out of the state prison system into the county probation supervision system. That had certain guarantees with it as it related to certain offenses that were not going to be allowed, that since have changed, to Prop 47 and Prop 57, which changed basically the entire sentencing system as it related to misdemeanors that could be considered both felonies and misdemeanors, and with an expansion of that. Also, at the same time, we've had a significant release of incarcerated folks out of the state prison system for the last 5 years, and then which in the tens of thousands. And now there's discussion of about over the next several years for those individuals that have been incarcerated 15 years or more for release, which is well over 70,000 people. In the course of those things, law enforcement, especially on a local level for the LA Sheriff's Department, specifically who we contract with, have suffered through vacancies as well as resource issues, and then an ongoing issue right now that's currently occurring between the elected sheriff and the Board of Supervisors with budget cuts and things as well. So with some of this law enforcement reform. So this discussion has been taking place for a long time, and we have done many things as a organization with the approval of the City Council and working with our community criminal justice partners to develop the infrastructure, so to speak, as it relates to moving forward into this formalized model. That includes a process, whereas that was highly innovative in the state, where we've converted certain penal code violations or criminal health and safety code violations or business profession code violations that were typically considered criminal and converted those into a civil administrative process with the approval of the judiciary as well as the public defender and district attorney. That program is ongoing and will be somewhat expanded as we move forward through this process. Trillies, could you go to the next slide, please? So what this really is it's not, there's a lot of misconception out there about this is like a replacement for the sheriff's department. And that is absolutely not true. What this is a filling the role in those gaps that we see in the service of law enforcement and their general duties as it relates to the sheriff's department's policy and implementation into our community. The sheriff's department's focus is they're very good at dealing with issues as far as emergency response and high priority calls, but there's lacking some issues as it relates to dealing with problems as they progress and continue, and especially on some of that low level type of enforcement as it relates to quality of life issues. So as you can see here, this has been a collaborative effort also with the blessing of Sheriff Villanueva, and working cooperatively with the Sheriff's Department is looking at how we look at this from a reinventing a law enforcement type model in our community based on the issues as we see them in our community, and also developing those community relationships out there to look at how the community sees itself and how it sees itself being policed within the current criminal justice system. So it has created a very strong working relationship with all our law enforcement and criminal justice partners out there, even beyond the LA Sheriff's Department, and working for this effort. Next slide, please. And as you can see, it's looking at chronic problems, and I can provide all kinds of data to you. It is, and we use a lot of data as we look at how we deploy throughout the community with both the Sheriff's Department's resources as well as other public law enforcement agencies that exist out there, and as well as us on a city level. We've already incorporated the hiring of numerous retired law enforcement officers who are currently working out there on some quality of life issues in our community. And then we leverage that data out there as it relates to how we deploy those resources out in the community. But some issues we see by looking at the calls for service, especially as it results from law enforcement, is we see a significant number of calls for service that don't ultimately end up in arrest or even a report being taken based on the activity. So a lot of that, we recognize that activity and continual calls for service to certain locations is probably not a good use of the Sheriff's Department's work, and more inclined to be used on a quality of life addressing issue. Typically, what we've seen is numerous calls for service to the same location that did not result in arrest or even a report, but over whatever issue may be taking place in the household. We have some locations that have received over 30 calls for service in a 12-month period, recognizing the fact that the deputies, based on policy or the amount of activity that they're dealing with in a given shift or things, can't get down to what the root of the issue is. So this is more an intervention and looking at causation type model that looks at really getting down to that reduction for those calls for service and addressing those issues within that household that's generating that activity. Next slide, please. So the things that are very important to achieve here is understanding that we need to build trust and the confidence of the community in what avenue we're taking to address policing in their city, in their communities, and reorient the community to what the mission and what their expectation should be. Of course, when people call, the Sheriff's Department's going to respond, but the Sheriff's Department may make a referral over into the hybrid policing model. So we develop a relationship with the activity that's taking place in that part of the community and come out with a more qualified result and a actual conclusion to that type of activity. And then it's very interesting because it's innovative from the aspect of is we try lots of different things to address issues and incorporate a lot of other public agencies that currently exist who are not currently working within that model. Next slide. So as you can see in the discussions that we've had and we've put out there, it's a transparency and coordination with those community partners, and that includes the community at large. And then again, focus on technology as it relates to data-driven approaches. So those things really tell us a lot of information. I will tell you that the IBM Watson tool alone has become a significant tool that's being both used by our local station in Lancaster as well as us in the Public Safety Office of the city to identify where we should expand resources in areas to address problems. And then how do we gauge our success? And gauge our success is obviously based on lowering the crime rate at large and also significantly reducing those responses and calls for service that actually cost a significant amount of money. So as we reorient those things, as we reduce that necessity for those responses in the community, we can address those resources in another way that's more proactive and deal with those causation issues. Next slide, please. So when you look at the organizational structure, those individuals out there that are going to be working in those districts need to be empowered to do certain things. As you can see through this slide, we deal with a lot of issues out there working with code enforcement and also referral from the community through our Comcate system and things to work collectively together to resolve whatever issue may be taking place in a community. The analytical support is very important as it relates to this program, again, to identify those locations through the community that need our attention. And then the social worker aspect is for referral out there as it relates to issues to this, as I described earlier. Obviously, if you have 33 calls for service with no resolution at a location, but no one's being arrested or even a report being taken, there's some other issue that's taking place there that's beyond the scope of the law enforcement focus and moves more into the aspect of contract for services or service providers that exist to look at what is really the issue within that household. Next slide, please. And that is it. I would say to you that this has been really an interesting thing to be working in 40 years as working in within the process of the criminal justice system. This is definitely a new approach. It's a highly innovative approach, and it's really being focused and looked upon by outside agencies outside of our community, as especially in light of things that are occurring now in criminal justice reform. So I appreciate your time, and please feel free to contact me if you have any questions.
Oh, great job, Lee. And just one addition to that is, these are programs we've been wanting to do, and I think the council's been communicating that. Measure LC gives us the opportunity to do it without cutting sheriff's contract. The level of service from the law enforcement perspective will remain the same. This is additive to that so that we can have a greater impact from a law enforcement perspective, just in a different way. So the LC gives us this opportunity.
Okay, so next up on the pyramid is the economic development level. So we're starting to get pretty high up there. And on this front, there's two programs that we'd like to touch on. The first is the corridor beautification. So I'm sure you all recognize this is our boulevard, which was redone about 10 years ago, 2010. It's turned out really nice. It's economically viable. It's doing well. So Measure LC gives us the opportunity to target other specific corridors. And we could do beautification enhancements to those corridors, offer facade grants to those corridors. This is a unique opportunity, but if we identify locations that are in need, we will be able to address this through this corridor beautification program. The next one is really business attraction and retention. I think economic development in the city of Lancaster is a big priority. Specifically, the goal is we need to create local, high-paying jobs that keep people here. I think the other side of it is all those infrastructure programs that we talked about earlier on. If we have good infrastructure programs, those backlogs are low, we have well-maintained streets, sidewalks, landscape maintenance districts. When we do or are successful at recruiting these high-quality jobs up here, those people that they bring to work for those jobs are going to want to move up here too, because the parks are nice, the streets are nice, all the amenities, all the things that they're looking for are nice as well. So it kind of all works holistically together. You know, we go out, we attract good businesses, and then because we're maintaining things well, those people want to live up here. So success breeds success, I think is the saying. So our priority is being able to do things like this health district, where we're creating a new hospital and creating a whole district around it, building roads and infrastructure for high-paying jobs, good living, good restaurants, all of that to come and really work in unison out there. This project, actually, the EIR was approved by council at its last meeting. We're moving this forward, and we hope to see construction out here within the next 6 months to a year on the infrastructure component. I think the hospital intends to break ground in the next couple of years on the new hospital. So being able to do things like this is a high priority, and there's a lot of other areas in the city that we're looking at as well. With that takes us to our new facilities, services, and program, which is really the top of the pyramid. So these are those things that you do after you've satisfied all of those other lower level needs. The first project we want to touch on is the Event and Evacuation Center. We're currently looking around for a location to put this center. It will be somewhere between 100 and 160,000 square foot center. The picture you see here is a location out up in Placerville, California. The goal is it's a center where we can have indoor football, basketball, volleyball, concerts, graduations, rodeos, circus, motorsports. You name it, it can do it. It also have indoor conference space so that if we want to do an indoor conference, we can. It will double as our evacuation center. So regionally, if we have an earthquake or some type of natural disaster, it will have a emergency operations center where we can come operate out of. It will have internet facilities for residents to bring in their trailers and hook up sewer, water, etc., bring their animals. You name it, it will be a regional evacuation center for the North County. So this is a goal of ours. Another program that
Truly, if I can jump in too, I wouldn't get everybody hung up on the look of that or the scale of it. I think operationally, if you pull up the Robert Lynn Center or however that's pronounced, you'll see kind of the operation of it and how we envision it being operated. It's obviously going to be much different. I don't say obviously, but it's likely to be a much different structure. But operationally, if you pull up that video or check research that, you can see the operations of it, and it's pretty. It's one of those things when you look around the community, you say, "What are we lacking?" This is one of those large structures that we are lacking as a community.
So the next program is really a tutor and childhood development program. And I think this was really an idea that came out of COVID. What we realized is that there's a lot of underprivileged children in the community that they don't have the technology or the resources to keep up, specifically in COVID. In the past, they had relied on getting their internet or their iPad at school and being able to do that. Well, now they don't have that. They have to be able to log in at home. So it's really created a divide between the more middle and upper class kids that have these resources at home and the underprivileged kids that don't necessarily have these resources at home. So we realize, especially in the next few years, we need to have a more prolific, pronounced program throughout the city where we have a lot of locations and sites where we're providing tutors, technology, and getting these underprivileged youth caught back up so that they can reintroduce, or when they get reintroduced into normal school, they're up to speed and at the same level as their peers, because we don't want them falling behind. And then our cultural arts and events programs. This is a pretty big, broad category, but as you know, we're known for our world-class events. We have the Poppy Fest, the Boulevard, 4th of July, Fields of Draft, Magical Christmas. What Measure LC does is it allows us to expand on that. So we're looking at things like an international food festival at the Jethawk Stadium. We're looking at things like a film festival on the Boulevard and really bringing more community events. We are currently in the process of going through and getting MOA upgraded to meet LACMA's highest standards. And therefore, that's going to open MOA up to more arts and events. We have the Cedar Center, which has really become a community youth hub. We're expanding and going to do a urban center at the 606 building at the Cedar Center. So Measure LC really allows us to evaluate our programs, evaluate the community needs, and expand it as necessary. And for this, the public banking system, I'll turn it over to George to touch on this slide.
Really, what you're looking at in the public bank is a concept born out of city manager's office, whereby we actually really think about how we can leverage our own assets and become a bank or create a bank for ourselves and other cities. There's a lot into this. There's a long way to go yet still. And so I don't want to get into a whole lot of specifics until that's ready for showtime. But in general, trying to figure out how we could find a way to create our own banking system, so that, because we, in our opinion, we're just not properly served by the existing privatized banking system. And so it tends to work against us in that our assets can't be invested to a level to get a better return. But then as a result of the capital cost, we don't have a lot of solutions to help us acquire capital and debt in a manner that is affordable. So it's costly, and we can't really leverage assets to make money on the other side. So we're looking at ideas on how to better that for ourselves and possibly expand that concept to incorporate other city agencies in as partners to do that. Right now, it's real preliminary, but just conceptually, it's one of those things that's really sitting at the top of although we're doing a lot of work behind the scenes to try to make it happen, it is sitting at the top of the pyramid. And from a funding standpoint, it's not as at the forefront as some of these other items, but it may not need to be if we do it right. We'd be leveraging our own assets without necessarily expensing a bunch of cash on this concept. It's just, how do we actually treat our own capital, and how do we leverage our own capital to put it to work in a better use. Now, last slide there, please. I do want to open this up for conversation, because it is your commentary, it is your input that we are going to be recording and passing on to the city council and to the city manager's office for consideration as we go through the next couple of weeks. Now, we probably have just given you $100 million worth of programs and projects, right? But we can't, and so when we think about Measure LC, we're not thinking about Measure LC as what is Measure LC going to produce in 21-22. Now, that's vital for our budget preparation as we're going through it now. All of these concepts are concepts that will be put into fruition over a period of time. If you just think about, and if Measure LC doesn't grow $1 in its annual return to the city, over a course of 10 years, it's $137 million. And so what we're trying to do is plan out the kind of and I hate using this word because it's so cliche, but the plethora of things that we will now be able to accomplish now that Measure LC is a revenue source for the city. And so, although we may have laid out a substantial amount of different programs, as the budget gets developed, a lot of those programs are going to actually take a higher priority, as we've discussed the priority and how we're going to address priority. A lot of those items are going to take a higher priority in year one and may not even be needed in year 3 or 4. But what we are seeking as far as commentary input from this particular body is, was there anything on the list that you think is not necessary and not worth investing in? And if so, that's definitely the advice that the city manager is going to need and the council is going to need as we progress through the next 4 weeks of deliberations. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, I don't want to call it horse trading, but there's going to be, we already have an existing large list that exceeds the resources of what's going to be available in 21-22. And we're going to have to actually narrow that list down to what can be afforded in year one. And so as we are evaluating all of those things that have already been put on the list by other departments, your input is pretty vital as to because as you represent the community and the community's interest by way of your appointment, it actually gives us another layer of consideration to take into that, what I call the cutting room floor meetings to decide what ultimately will be placed into the current year budget. And we'll continue this process as we go on, year after year, and in consideration of the final budget. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to you, Chairman Vos, to hear any input and to accept and record any commentary, unless Jason has a few words.
Yeah, just let me add real quick too. It's also things that you may want to remove, right? There may be things that we put in there that say that aren't necessary, right? Or a question of whether we had the right priority or not. Is the pyramid in the right category as it relates to George on the cutting room floor, as it relates to, beautification is probably more important than something else. That's going to be vital for us, that information as well. So, what more do you want to add? What do we change, or where do we change the priorities as well? I think is those key inputs.
So with that, we'll turn the meeting back to you, Chairman Vos, and that concludes our presentation, but we can shift and move to any particular slide that we brought up to kind of add a little context to any questions or commentary that you may have.
Thank you. It's a lot to absorb in an hour and a half, that's for sure, since you folks have been working on it for, depending on your pet project, for a long time, right? Certainly, Mr. DiRico, I've heard it, that model is that you're working on and facilitating over time has really proven to be a very positive thing for the community. And from my point of view, it certainly deserves support, that's for sure. I'd like to hear from other members here. I don't know how much time everybody this evening wishes to commit, and what your thoughts are, if you care to share them. Any of the members?
Yeah, I can make a couple comments if I may. I find it hard to really throw a lot of input towards it where I have no idea what kind of money we're talking about going towards each section of these projects specifically. I mean, obviously, I agree that everything that you guys have shown us so far is definitely important. How important as far as money is a whole nother topic. I mean, I'm a big supporter of the public safety program, and I really want to make sure we do everything we can to support that wholeheartedly. And the streets and the parks are, those are no-brainers from my point of view as well. But I just don't really know, should we spend X amount of dollars on this one project? I don't know what those numbers are, and it's kind of hard to really give an opinion. I mean, because all the projects have merit. It's to what degree are we going to be supporting them is kind of the questions that I have.
And that's a fair question. We don't know yet. And the reason why I say it that way is that there's such a long list of needs.
Right.
Below each one of those categories, and if you talk to Trolese, he's got specific projects with specific dollar amounts listed. But conceptually, we want to make sure that, are parks more or less important than economic development? And on our pyramid, we're saying that they are, right? It's that level of feedback. No, economic development is 100, and we should be feeding that at the bottom rung. It's that kind of feedback that we're looking for. Until we actually get into the final deliberations on the budget, it will be very, very difficult for us to put specific dollar amounts on there to present to you, because at the end of the day, we still have the constraints of what our actual resources are going to be in any given year to be able to put resource. Now, one item, like we said, one item could be a brand new park that we want to fund in a single year. Well, guess what? That becomes a high priority in year one. In year three, it's no longer a priority because we've already built it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And so conceptually, we're talking about the programs here, and do we have it right as far as the priority for those programs? And so as we've listed them, conceptually, are we going along the right path in regards to how we are prioritizing those programs? Because that's how we're going to address the priorities as we go into the actual deliberations on what's being presented to the council for the final budget. But it's a fair question.
If I can add too, George, if it's, I don't want to call it consensus, I understand the Brown Act issues, but from the standpoint of that commitment, and Jeff, you bring it up, and Chairman Vos brought it up as well. The finality of that, what we're recommending to the council, if we want to tighten that up a little bit and have another one of these meetings, and I'm sure you guys are committed to that time frame, bring those numbers back once it kind of gets shuffled in with the other programs and priorities. Be happy to do that, and I think we can within the time frame we have. We're looking at a month from now before going to council for the first budget hearing, so we have some time to do that. If that's a concern by the group, we can bring it back and say we're going to be spending $2 million on public safety. We're going to spend $1 million on roads. We're going to spend, it'll be generalized. Like, I don't think you want the list of treleases because you'll be spending $800 million on roads. But wouldn't that be repaved?
I like parks too.
Yeah. It may not be repaved 10th from 20th to 30th, but it's going to be $1 million to roads improvement. $500,000 smart cities, those types of things. I think that's something we could put together prior to a month from now.
Well, you addressed, if I understood you all correctly, you talked about your revenue certainly balances the books and you have adequate reserves forecast for this next fiscal year, right?
Correct.
So then you have continuing projects that have a life over time. So those to me would need to be prioritized and valued in whatever method you value them at. The engineering side of the numbers game, right? And those may or may not be categorized as appropriate additional funding from Major LC, or they may well be. And then you have, I don't want to call it a wish list because it's not a wish list. To me, there are extremely important categories of future development, whether it's economic or public safety or whatever. So I'm not I'm not belittling the term, okay? But those then have different categories of potential priority. We all have worked in different arenas through our lives, and most of us have worked with staff who come to us with recommendations in our public and private endeavors. And we typically rely on staff. I've been involved with the city directly for over 13 years, and the staff that I worked with over these last years certainly are professional and understand their job very well, and they come to us in our commissions with very well thought out recommendations. Sometimes we don't agree with them, but for the most part, we certainly value their recommendations. This is, $100 million is awful broad brush when you're looking at a $13 million annual revenue over time. Has any consideration been given, for instance, to bonding out the entire list and using the major LC as a debt service?
That is a component of some of these projects. Some of the larger ones that are specifically the event center, that's going to be more than a one-year allocation. That would be the tool to use to fund something like that. So that would be an ongoing expense that would be over a 15, 20-year period as debt service. You wouldn't want to use up your entire year on one project, or maybe you would. We wouldn't recommend it. But like a road system, if you're going to build a $2 million road, then this year it's $2 million. If next year you're going to pick a different road, or you might do 10 roads with $2 million. Next year you might pick another one, but it's not something you have to program $2 million every year. The things that are likely to program $2 million or a certain number every year is going to be debt service on the larger projects. I think we've only identified one project that would categorize that way. And then the ongoing operational, the largest being public safety, some of the smaller ones being the tutoring program, things like that, that would be an ongoing program operation. So you kind of break those up: debt service, ongoing program operation, and capital. And that capital would just be reoccurring every year. We might come back and say, yeah, it's still valid to do roads, but we're just picking different roads this year.
And there's other approaches that you don't leverage anything and you pay as you go.
Correct.
Which is the one I absolutely prefer, because capital costs, as I discussed before, under the banking concept, the capital cost for cities is not insignificant.
No. Well, and there's always a payday at the end. Somebody's got to get paid for it. And, the dollar you borrow today on a 30-year bond is worth how much? Over time?
Right.
$2.50 maybe? So,
yeah.
It's crazy. It's Harvey.
Chairman Vos, I just have one question. So from a prioritization perspective, and Jason, I was going right down that line of thinking prior to you mentioning it. Because I know sometimes we can boil the ocean, try to do too much at one time. But from a prioritization perspective, how were those items that list prioritized? Was there some sort of mini charrette or something done, or a focus group with the public? How did we determine what gets looked at or funded first, or was the front of our mindset first? How did we get to those particular line items?
Well, you guys are the focus group, so this is part of that process. Two is there.
No, but I mean before it even hit that list. So I get the whole Mavlov's hierarchy. I get all of that, and building in a good foundation. But I'm saying, how did today's list? How did some of those things arrive on the list? Is it just because from a subject matter expert perspective from the city?
Yes.
There's best management practices. Obviously, a firm financial base. The reserve is number one, right? If you got $10 in the bank, you're not going to be able to self-actualize, right? And then the next one is from an infrastructure perspective, is that some of those infrastructure needs are financial losses as well. So if your road system breaks apart and you don't maintain it well, it becomes more expensive to maintain later. So it's more financially effective to maintain that now. That goes with sidewalks, all infrastructure. That's roofs on buildings, that's electrical systems, that's toilets and bathrooms, it's the whole 9 yards. So that's kind of first and foremost, because those continue to dilapidate. They're going to continue to cost you more money 5 years from now.
No, I get that. And the reason I drove to that, not to cut you off, is because Trelease, you made a comment about LPAC, but you didn't finish what that would be for LPAC. I was taking notes. I didn't know what on LPAC would have been, because LPAC would have been, for me personally, I wouldn't have even looked at LPAC as a part of a first list of items. I would have looked at public safety. I would have looked at infrastructure as far as roads, some of the other things that you talked about. That's why I was wondering, how did we get to that initial list?
Specific LPAC was part under the parks program. It could be one of. It's an example of what could be one of the first. And the reason we put that on the list is it actually has a very aging lighting system that's archaic inside. It's about 25 years old. And it's been breaking down a lot, and the manufacturers of that system just don't support it anymore. So it's one of those that we need to go in, we need to redo the lighting inside so that we can keep the show going in there, basically. And that's why that made the list. And that's how we looked at. The other thing I'll add to what Jason was saying too, when we came up with these lists too, these are a lot of, especially in the infrastructure realm, these are where our comcates are generated. So that resident service system where residents say, hey, here's illegal dumping, or there's potholes. We looked at those too, and we said, where are we getting the most resident requests in what
That's what I'm trying to drive you to. That's what I'm trying to, that's my question.
So we looked at those and said, hey, here's where they are. We need programs to address these, or if we already have a program, we need to make that program more, a bigger program, so we're able to address these comcates.
That's what I'm driving at. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
So what you're saying then is that the list of infrastructure, for instance, these programs are not currently adequate. These proposed programs are not currently adequately funded to meet the community's need, perceived or otherwise.
Correct. And in some case, we have claims data that shows we're not keeping up. We're getting too many claims on our sidewalks and too many trip and falls happening. So we know we need to put money in that to stop that.
Right. Mm-hmm. So that to me just begs the question then, those life safety issues then would be a priority certainly from a liability standpoint for local government. Public safety, I don't categorize that as public safety. It is, but it's not police, okay? Public safety is, in my mind, is police. Life safety are the list of the ADA, sidewalks, and pavement management, and so forth. Mm-hmm. So for me, if those are categorized in a way of value over time, I mean, if you're looking at ADA sidewalks and you've got 150 of them to put in and they cost you $15,000 per, you've got a number. I don't know if you've gone through that exercise, but it seems to me you've got to go through that exercise before you can put it into a budget. And so that's one group of categories. Then you have the public safety aspect. To me, the hybrid police issue is primary, but also the quality of life, how the community looks, what people perceive when they see the community, the debris, the trash, the neighborhoods that are really not a place where you'd want to walk around at 10 o'clock at night, okay? So those kinds of things are in another category, at least from the way I see it. That, you talked about the tutoring, child development, that sort of stuff. I mean, there's partnerships out there, I'm assuming, that the city can develop with other agencies, nonprofit agencies, who then can partner with the city with some sort of seed money to get those kinds of programs started. But I see basically two major categories: public safety and life safety issues. Really, that's how I see it.
Okay.
And I think I would add to you, there's a quality of life component too, that, there's certain things that the expectations that are not life safety or public safety, but there's, a community image, atmosphere, whatever that may be. So if you don't mind, I'd add a third one to that. And as it relates to priority, then you can start layering in those priorities, and that's similar to the pyramid, but it's broken down in more easier fashion.
I've often said to myself as I drive around the community, because as with the Planning Commission, there's a lot of projects and they're scattered all over the place over time. We all, most of the commissioners drive around, look at the project, sites prior to a meeting to get some sense of where it is in the community and that sort of thing. But you see a lot where, and I've said to myself, gee, I wonder who else is coming out from local government to actually look around the community to see what the heck's going on here. And it's not a criticism, it's just a sense that I have. And that's the life, that's the community. That's what attracts development into a community. If it looks sharp, all the years of citing commercial projects in the community, when you do a tour with a project developer, a tenant, a primary tenant, and they spend 45 minutes in your town or an hour and a half maximum, they get a distinct impression of whether they're going to invest millions or not. And if they see the wrong thing, you're dead. And I'm preaching to the choir. You guys are shaking your head because you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So, if the Walmarts of this world or the Targets or whomever they may be, we can't even drive on the same street more than once when you do a tour. It's amazing how it works. So anyway, that's how I see it. I'll be quiet and let everybody else talk. Mr. Yeager, and I appreciate what you said, and I sense that you've got more you'd like to add.
Well, I'm listening, and the discussion is helping clarify how I should be looking at this. As Mr. Harris said, it's it's the prioritizing the efforts is the main thing that we're supposed to be imparting our opinions on, and I think that's kind of what we're doing. And I like the life categories, the public safety, and the quality of life categories, and I can relate to all that.
And I think though, it's hard. It's important to note those all interrelate.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
How we represent our community has a direct connection to what proliferation of criminal activity will take place. If it looks like we care or the community cares, that's a stopgap for that type of activity in public safety. So, and especially on the quality of life, emphasis is exactly where we're going with this model. Okay, we really want to focus on raising the standard quality of life in the community, which makes all these other things grow and thrive. And that's I think the focus.
Yeah.
I would add too, and Jim, you bring up a good point, is that there's certain things we can't half fund. We can't half fund the hybrid law enforcement model, or it doesn't work. We can pave $1 million worth of street or $2 million worth of street. You're just going to get less street paved, but there's going to be certain things that we're recommending to you that we're not going to have fund. It's going to say it's going to cost whatever number, $2 million. If that's what it costs, we're not going to be able to say, oh, well, let's fund it at $1 million, because it just doesn't work without it. So, those are some other categories that we have to calculate in our mind as well. That some things you can't half do, you got to do it the whole way.
Right.
And as you add programs, that also typically adds people. Your staff resources at whatever level, you can certainly ask people to do more with less to a point. You max out eventually, and as we know, and so that has to be factored in too. Between the labor cost and burden, it's substantial. So if I'm hearing it, everybody, I haven't heard from Mr. Gomez. I'm sorry, David.
Yes. No, not a problem. I think it comes down, for me, is priorities. What is staff looking for? Also, of the existing programs and the not existing yet. The question is, what I see is $13 million the first year. How much we're willing to spend? Yes, these create jobs. I think part of it will create other taxes or whatever from the jobs, but it is come down to priority. Public safety, I think, is an important one on my list. And then seeing, the new I consider the new program I've been talking about with working with the sheriffs and Lee's, I call it Lee's program, but on that. So, sorry,
better not mess it up then.
No. So, and I think this is going to grow if we, the economy and creating these jobs, and it's like a recycled wheel. So hopefully we'll get there. But that's basically where I'm at right now. And also, it's a lot to take in. Mm-hmm. I'm definitely going to be calling Jason to get more information so I can dissect this, because it's all for an hour and a half of this. Want to know where the money's going to go, where we want to put it, and that. And I'll be relying on staff to help me get there. So
we appreciate it. One comment you made is how much we're going to spend. I think it's the voters' intent, and it's our responsibility to spend it all. And spend it all on good projects. We always tell a story from a job creation perspective. If we're sitting on $100 million worth of revenue, and we're not building roads, then there's somebody that doesn't have a job. There's somebody that's not getting employed building roads, or there's not a road getting built. So we have, I think it's the intent of the taxpayer as well that, they entrusted us, all of us on this call, with these funds to spend them wisely, but more importantly, to spend them and improve their community and build the things that they're going to benefit from, and build the programs that they're going to be safer because of. So that's our intent, and then hopefully, next after the budget's approved, after our meeting, then the budget, we'll come back and say, how did we do, right? And Trelease will be able to share how many roads he's got under or ready to bid. Lee's going to talk about how many people he's employed and where we're at with the implementation. It's going to be those types of things that the expectation is then to spend it and implement it. And that, that's the second part of our goal.
Very good. Thank you.
Chairman Vos, I have another, I guess, comment or question. I guess because I'm such a process-oriented person in all facets of my life, and going to your earlier point as far as, because I almost feel like, not that we're deliberating right now, what are we allowed to say when it comes to the Brown Act? I mean, what can we do in this particular meeting, or is there another meeting? What's the decision going forward? Because I feel like it's a little bit loose. I'm not sure. Going back to your earlier point, we know that there's not a vote that takes place, and then, oh, by the way, because this was a lot to take in at one time, is there another meeting that we need to have prior to the public meeting? I don't know. That's just a question.
Yeah, and I think upon your request, we can facilitate another meeting where we kind of share in anticipation of the council's workshop, kind of where in each one of these categories final budget numbers fell after we have our package ready to go, and share that with you all in a meeting before it goes to the council. And so in that advisory capacity, once again, I'll still have to research whether an affirmative vote of that is required, as opposed to simply relaying your commentary over to the council for their consideration as they are making the actual final choice. That's the research I'll do with the attorney and whatnot, and make sure. But we definitely want to provide you, and the intent was to provide you with the actual specific numbers that are coming out of the budget into those, which is whether or not it was before the council's deliberation and decision or after. It sounds like there seems to be if we did reach any consensus, it's the consensus that you want to hear that information prior to the council and not after, so that you can actually advance.
I personally want to hear, because it makes it our role for naught as far as I'm concerned. That's just this one committee member's opinion.
I agree with that opinion.
Okay. So we'll work with Diane to try to get that scheduled either the last week of May or the first week of June. We'll try to avoid pulling you away from any further birthday dinners if we So we'll try to start now and try to coordinate with each one of you on your schedules.
Well, I opened my big mouth, so I need to make myself available. So
Fair enough.
There it is.
Do you have a birthday coming up by the end of the month, or another
No,
birthday?
it's the end of the year.
Okay, end of the year.
No,
Okay,
it
good.
is
I just
the
want to
year.
make sure I don't want lightning to strike twice on us.
No.
That's not the second time.
I would add too, George, even if it's not required by the resolution or the ordinance, if that's the wish of the group to have consensus and take a vote, we will plan to do that as well.
Fair enough.
There's nothing in the ordinance that's going to preclude you from doing it, but
That's correct.
definitely, we'll share that information with you and be prepared for you guys to do that.
And I think what I'm hearing is that in general, you're good with the pyramid and the prioritization that we came up with, where we focus on public safety, life safety, quality of life. Now you just want to see more of the details of how that lays out. And that's what we'll come back with at the next meeting.
Right.
Sounds good.
Now, I specifically actually heard that there was a bit of prioritization, and I know we're not voting, but if I can, give me a eye wink or a nod, that the life safety issues were somewhat higher priority than public safety, than quality of life. Is that a fair enough statement as we are approaching? So those issues where we have received some claims or requests to consider as they are either I don't want to say violation of ADA, but can improve upon ADA capabilities. Those sidewalks that need to be addressed, like all those things get some consideration, either in parity with the public safety or slightly above the public safety aspect. That's how it was presented. I just want to get some clarity on that.
Well, let me first ask. I'm sorry. So, Lee, I was going to call you Dorico. That's what I call you behind your back. So, where does Lee's fall? Where does yours fall under again? Your category?
Public safety was the
Public
second
safety.
category.
Okay.
No, public safety was the third. It's the third.
Sorry, it's the third.
It's the
I forget
third
about
block
the
on the
reserves.
pyramid. Yeah, you've got fiscal reserves, infrastructure, and then public safety.
Correct.
Okay.
Maybe if you get a chance, the slides that were created, if you can email them to all the members.
Absolutely.
That way
Yes.
we've got something in hand we can look at, because you folks work on 2 screens. Most of us only have 1, right?
Yes, I have 3. Actually, I have 3.
So,
And Charlize is an engineer, so I think he has 4 or 5 screens.
We've got screens everywhere. I'm in virtual reality right now.
It's like the Matrix in his office.
yeah. All right, very
So
good.
yeah, we'll definitely get we'll get that PowerPoint presentation out.
Appreciate that. Anything further from anyone, members? We'll go
Not
around.
for me. I'm fine.
You good? Okay. As part of the public meeting, we're obliged to ask if there are any public speakers relative to the presentation tonight. Ms. Dush, could you make that announcement, please?
At this time, anyone wishing to comment on the budget presentation, please press *9. I will announce the last 4 digits of your call-in number when it's your turn to speak. Please state your name and eliminate any background noise. Individual speakers are limited to 3 minutes each and will be remuted after the allotted time. Please press *9 at this time. There are no callers.
All right, thank you. Okay, and if we're done with this item, then it would be appropriate then to move on to the consent calendar. And the only item we have, action item tonight, is to approve the meeting minutes of our March 31st, 2021 special meeting. So may I have a motion, please?
A motion to approve the minutes from the March 31st meeting.
Thank you.
Do we need to open it up to comments?
Yep, after the motion, yeah. Have a second?
Second?
Thank you. Okay. Now you can announce the public comment portion. Thank you.
Okay, well, I was referring to the comments on the minutes. So do we want to just go by that?
Yes, you announced now that this is the time for the public to comment on the proposed action item, which is the meeting minutes, March 31st.
Okay, at this time, anyone wishing to comment on CC1, please press *9. I will announce the last 4 digits of your call-in number when it is your turn to speak. Please state your name and eliminate any background noise. Individual speakers are limited to 3 minutes each and will be remuted after the allotted time. Please press *9 at this time. There are no callers.
All right, thank you. All right, then, if there's nothing further from the members, then it would be appropriate to call the roll, please.
Committee member Yeager?
Here?
No, I need a yes or a no.
Yes.
Okay. Committee member Gomez?
Yes.
Committee member Harvey?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Sison is not available. Chairman Vos?
Yes. So the votes 4 yeses, no nos, and 1 absent. Okay. All right, that would conclude our action items. The next item on the agenda is any further announcements from staff? Sheriffs? Mr. Harris? No?
I'd just like to see if City Manager Cotto had any announcements.
Nope, we've talked enough.
Yeah, I agree. No, and I have nothing further to add, Chairman Bose.
Nearly 2 hours. Thank you very much, you guys. It's very informative, very productive. Thank you. Okay, this would be the time then to listen to public comments from the floor if there are any. So Ms. Dosh, could you announce it, please?
At this time, anyone wishing to comment on non-agendized items, please press *9. I will announce the last 4 digits of your call-in number when it is your turn to speak. Please state your name and eliminate any background noise. Individual speakers are limited to 3 minutes each and will be remuted after the allotted time. State law prohibits the committee from taking action on items not listed on the agenda. Please press *9 at this time. And there are no callers.
All right, thank you. All right, then, once around the table, members, anything further from anyone? Mr. Gomez? Ms. Harvey?
No, sir.
No? Mr. Yeager, no?
No.
All right. Okay, then well, pursuant to the agenda, our next meeting is, regular scheduled meeting is for Wednesday, July 21st, 2021. So we'll adjourn to that date certain. And, but based on our previous conversations, it's likely we will have a meeting either later at the end of this month or the first week in June, which then can be posted appropriately. All right then, so we stand adjourned till Wednesday, July 28th, 2021 at 5 p.m. Thank you all.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Appreciate the time. Okay.